Okay, so we're going to continue now with annotating this poem. Now, what you should have done already is you should have your title and you should have all the paraphrasing because those we went through yesterday in Monday's video. So what we're going to do today is we're going to move on to the next part of the TP-CASTT, the C, which is connotation. And connotation is the part where we go through and look at all the figurative language. Now, I'm going to color code this because to me, once I get all my paper filled up with words, it's helpful to be able to see the different parts. So I'm going to put a C over here, and that stands for connotation. And I'm going to do all of my connotation work in this light blue color here. Now, the first thing I want to look at, and it doesn't really matter what order you do this in, this is just the order that I'm choosing to work in right now, is I'm going to take a look at the rhyme scheme. Now, I'm sure that you've seen rhyme scheme before. You always start with the letter A. So I'm going to say there's A, and then if the next line is different at the end, you use B. So I have a go and C, and then I have no. Well, no rhymes with a go, so that's an A. Then I have Lee, that rhymes with C, so that's another B. And then I have a word that doesn't rhyme with either A or B, so that one's going to be C, and then I have me. So that's another B. So what I have here, at least in this stanza, is I have A, B, C, B. So I'm going to keep going through my rhyme scheme and see if it's the same in every stanza. Child, C, okay, so I have A, B, C, B, D, B. Okay, then I have a go, that's going to be A, B, C, B, D, B, E, B. So we can keep going all the way down through our poem with all of those letters. Now, another thing that I want to look at is there's a lot of repetition in this poem. Here we have the C, the C, the C, the C, the C. So we have this word repeated over and over through the poem. Now you have to understand, nothing that gets repeated in a piece of writing is repeated accidentally. So Edgar Allan Poe had a reason for doing this, and we can talk about those reasons as we continue to annotate. Another thing that's going to be repeated all the time is we have Annabel Lee. We have Annabel Lee. Annabel Lee. Over and over again, we have that name, Annabel Lee. Again, we have that repetition, and that keeps that name coming up in the poem over and over again. Now, let's look at some other things here. Now, let me look at this line right here in our first stanza. And this maiden, she lived with no other thought. Now, that's an exaggeration, and it's a type of exaggeration that's called a hyperbole. Now, that's a very poetic thing to say, but the truth is everybody, no matter how much in love they are, would have other thoughts from time to time. So we can't say that that is a complete, like, there's no other thing going on in a person's head. Now, also, here it's talking about I was a child and she was a child. So we have young love. This is something that struck these two people at a young age. And then we have it again, repetition right here. So that theme keeps coming up over and over in this stanza. It's like we're talking about it was love, it was love. So we have this repetition again of this idea. Now here, this word chilling, that's going to be imagery because it's giving us the idea that we can almost feel this cold sea air blowing, coming up out of the wind over the ocean. And then we have, this is an older generation, her parents. So here we have an older generation, and they are interfering in this young love. And then we have, again, the repetition of C, C, C. Now here, the wind came out of the cloud by night. That's an example of personification, because the wind just did what the wind does, but giving it like it did it on purpose, that's personifying. Now here we have, look, right, soul from my soul. This is the idea of soulmates, that they were made for each other. And that kind of goes back to this stanza here, where it was a love that was more than love. It was stronger than any love, that so much so that the angels in heaven were jealous. That's pretty powerful. And then here we have, again, without bringing me dreams. Now that's another example of hyperbole, because there were other things going on. And it's also personification, because it gives it a kind of intentionality that doesn't really exist. We're putting that on there. Okay, so that's some of the things that I saw as I went through. Now I want to, over here on the side, I'm going to write down some things that I saw. Now, one of the things I'm going to write down is a refrain. Now we see refrains mostly in things like songs, and that's something that's repetition. It's going to be something that's repeated. And that refrain is the kingdom by the sea. That happens all throughout this poem. So that would be a constant refrain. Now that gives us our setting. Now, it's kind of a fairy tale type setting. A lot of fairy tales have that idea of it's in a kingdom, it's in a palace or a castle. So we have that idea. We also have a refrain, and I pointed this out earlier, of Annabel Lee. We see that over and over and over again. And our speaker is madly in love with Annabel Lee. Maybe even to the point of being obsession. We also have repetition in this poem, and I did point out some of that as we were going through. There's a lot of mention about love, and if that goes right back up to our repetition of Annabel Lee. Now I want to talk about word choice, and I pointed this out as we were annotating. It's fairy tale-like, and this kind of gives it a certain quality, because as I pointed out before, we have the kingdom. We have many and many years ago, which is kind of like once upon a time, because that's got the same kind of idea behind it. We have angels. That's a fairy tale quality. Then we have Annabelle, who is beautiful, like a princess. And all the princesses in fairy tales are always beautiful. We have symbolism. Now that's a type of figurative language where something stands for something else. And in this we have the sea wind, and that is symbolizing her death. A cold wind from the sea blew up and caused her death. We also have the symbolism of the sea itself. The sea can symbolize loneliness in a poem. It can symbolize emptiness. It can symbolize coldness. And then we have the sepulcher, which is a fancy word for tomb, and that is going to symbolize death also. Now, these all together can help us point out the power of nature, which in poetry especially is very, very powerful. And we also have our end rhyme. Now, not all poems rhyme, but when they do, it's something that we do need to pay attention to. Now, we have A, B, C, B in our first stanza. And this rhyme, A, B, C, B, creates the sensation of a wave, like on the ocean. So having that rhyme scheme and the way the words go together gives us a wave-like rhythm. And I also want to point out, you don't have to write this down, but we have like a long line, like the tide going out, and a short line like it coming back in. And then a long as it goes out, and then a short as it comes back in. And that goes through the entire poem, which gives us that rhythm of the waves of the sea, the tide going out and the tide coming back in. So that's just another way that we can look at the way this poem is laid out on the page, a long, short, long, short, long, short. It gives us that sensation. So these are things that we can definitely pay attention to as we're looking at this poem. Now there you can see it's all through this poem over and over again. So when you're annotating like this, when you're looking at figurative language, don't just look for similes, don't just look for metaphors, because you might not find that many, but you can see there's rhyme scheme, there's hyperbole, there's repetition, there's like the repetition of certain words and certain ideas. We've got imagery. We've got this older generation like in a power play with the younger generation, and that's causing it's causing a disconnect. It's causing a like a crack in the world of these people. And then in this poem, and you don't see symbolism in every poem, but in a lot you do. And you need to understand, yes, the sea wind is the sea wind, but it also symbolizes the death of Annabel Lee. The sea is the ocean. It's a thing. It really does exist, but it also symbolizes or stands for these things here. So it's important to have both of those to understand what is it really saying and what could it stand for, what could it symbolize. So make sure as you're doing your poem that you have everything written down here that I do. Make sure that you've looked at the rhyme scheme and you've written all of these notes down. This is a thorough annotation of the figurative language of this poem. And it's important that you have all this written down so when you need this information to answer questions, you're going to know exactly where to find it. So tomorrow we will look at the attitude and tone and the shift in this poem. And actually in this poem, we're looking at 2 or 3 different shifts. For a short poem, that's quite a lot. So we will talk about that tomorrow in class. Make sure that you have this done.